The European Union has proposed the world's first carbon border tax on some imported goods as part of its most ambitious plan yet to tackle the climate crisis. The proposal details the bloc's goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 and eventually becoming carbon neutral by 2050. As Sara Firth reports, one way of doing that is by building up forests and grasslands.
Not just areas of natural beauty. Forests, grasslands, croplands and wetlands are also an important way of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and offsetting CO2 emissions. And new European Commission plans will put forests like these on the front line in the fight against global warming. EU countries are striving to reach net zero emissions by 2050, the goal scientists say the world must meet to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis.
Today we are all stuck in the fossil economy.
To speed up the process, last month the European Parliament approved a landmark law to make the European Union's greenhouse gas emissions targets legally binding.
Today is a historic day. Today we will enshrine into law that EU, which started as a coal and steel union more than 70 years ago, will become the first carbon neutral continent by 2050 at the latest. With this law, EU maintain its leadership as the region with the most ambitious targets for climate.
Meeting the net zero benchmark means reaching an equilibrium where no more greenhouse gases are emitted than are removed from the atmosphere. That's where so-called carbon sinks come in. In 2018, Europe's forests, lakes and wetlands absorbed around 263 million tonnes of CO2 from the atmosphere. Europe is hoping to expand these carbon sink areas so they can absorb 310 million tonnes per year by 2030. The European Commission's new report will set each member state a legally binding goal. It's something environmental campaigners have long been calling for.
I think it's not too late. We could take the dramatic action that's necessary. We've got 9 years until the deadline set by the Paris climate talks some years ago, and carbon can be cut. We can make a big difference. We can stop this happening, and we must do that.
The proposed increase in carbon sinks puts Europe at the forefront of the fight against the climate crisis. Sara Firth, TRT World.
Let's get more on this now with Ben McWilliams, who's a research analyst at Bruegel, a European think tank that specialises in economics in the bloc. He joins us now from Liverpool. Great to have you with us, Ben. Now, the word of the day in describing this plan seems to be ambitious, and certainly some of the measures are. The proposal would effectively ban the sale of diesel and petrol cars by 2035. It would impose a 10% tariff on jet fuel. It would also impose a border tax on manufacturers from outside the EU. Do you think these measures are achievable, or are they too ambitious?
Hi, Oscar. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think that you outline nicely the position that we are in. The measures are ambitious, but so are the targets. The targets, as we all know, are net zero by 2050 and 55% reduction by 2030. And the Commission has to come forward with their interpretation on how this can be achieved, which by necessity is ambitious. Whether each individual component can be achieved, we'll find out over the next 1 to 2 years as these are negotiated by the Parliament and the Council. And different member states will have views on different elements, opposing some more than others. But on the whole, I think that this is a very sensible set of proposals. I think it's comprehensive. It's covering the whole economy. It doesn't leave too many gaps. And I think it's also a very good starting point for now negotiations over the next year on the exact targets and the exact points of intervention. So on the whole, a very, very positive day in my view.
Now, these measures would invariably push up the costs of things like flights. perhaps household heating bills, cars, and things like that, that are directly affected by some of these proposed changes. Do you think consumers might feel the pain, and is it worth that?
I think this is the million-dollar question. One of the big proposals today was a new emissions trading system, a new carbon price, which would apply directly to consumers. So far in the EU, we have a carbon price on industries and power generators, but today the Commission proposes a carbon price which will be applied to the fuels that consumers use to drive their cars and to heat their houses. This is necessary, but clearly very, very tricky. In Europe, we've had recent experience in France with the Yellow Vests movement of strong backlash to these kind of policies. Now, what's important is that at the same time as imposing a tax on these sectors, the European Commission and national governments do what they can to create alternatives for consumers so they can switch away from their natural gas boilers. There's no point imposing a tax on a household consuming natural gas when they're not able to invest in a heat pump or a different technology to power their house. And today we did see some steps towards this with the announcement of a new fund, which will go directly towards this. And these are the kind of discussions now which national governments and the European Commission need to be having. And for me, this is really one of the largest sticking points in the proposals we see today.
And as with all European Commission proposals, it does need the unanimous agreement of all of the 27 member nations, and we know that's never an easy task. Do you think inevitably that some of these measures will have to be watered down in order to win that broad support from all of its member nations?
As you say, as always. In fact, the report today it's not only one report, it's a combination of many different things. There are 8 pieces of legislation which will be strengthened and 5 new ones. And so the voting arrangements for each of these deals will differ. However, there will certainly need to be trade-offs. This is the kind of discussions that will be coming over the next 2-3 years. And this is the game the Commission has to play. They have tools at their disposal already under the existing carbon price. There's a modernisation fund which goes to those member states which have higher carbon emissions, and already today this was boosted slightly as a first token towards these member states, but we can certainly expect over the coming months that this will be the discussion we're having. On the whole, I think that member states have already backed the climate law. They've already agreed that the targets for 2030. So I do think the kind of conversations that we will be having now are not, can we reach this ambition, but rather, if you don't like one piece of this legislation, why, and what could you think of replacing it by? Because we already have a good starting point, but this set of tools is not the only way to decarbonise, and there are alternatives. But I do think the conversation is shifting away from can we decarbonise and should we decarbonise to how we can decarbonise.
Okay, Ben McWilliams from Bruegel. We will have to leave it there, but thank you again for joining us on the program.